Welcome back, Camden Catholic. So we've been talking about in class the last couple days about the major differences between the city-states of Athens and Sparta, right? So first and foremost, of course, the obviously glaring differences are Sparta's militaristic society. They're ruled by an oligarchy, which is a small group of people, the kings and the council of elders. We talked about like the intensive military training that each person underwent, the fact that the citizens were only males over 30, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Excuse me. So we talked about that, and also how Athenians were much more about being extra in the sense of intelligence and rightful place and blah, 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 blah. So the main thing we need to talk about now, though, is how they do share a lot of similar traits because they are both Greek, right? Now, even though that they were settled by two different types of people, the Ionians and the Dorians, they still do share a lot of similar aspects, okay? So let's go ahead and get into that. First and foremost, of course, is their religion, right? What type of religion are they? I'm waiting. Good job, Jordan. They're polytheistic, all right? So many of you could ramble off a lot of Greek gods right now. Zeus, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Dionysus, Poseidon, like Hades, all these other types of gods and goddesses, right? Ares, Artemis, Hermes, like all types of religious figures through the Greek mythology that you've known for probably quite some time. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this at length tomorrow, but mainly you got to understand, though, that they actually believe that all of their gods came from the same place, that they all came from the Mount Olympus, which is an actual mountain in northern Greece towards the border of Macedonia. Now, to discover the will of the gods, both groups of people thought that you had to go and talk to these things called oracles, right? Oracles are priests and priestesses that were supposed to be able to speak to the gods. Now, myths also were used. Notice when we talked about Athens, we talked about how they learned public speaking, math, some science, music, things like that. They never really learned a heavy amount of science because what did they use to replace science? Well, they used mythology, right? Myths were used to explain things they really couldn't wrap their head around. For example, the story of Persephone and Hades is how you know why the flowers bloom in spring, or the reason why thunder and lightning occurs is because Zeus is like really, really upset about something, right? So you have to understand that myths in early religion were used to explain things that people didn't understand, right? So this is the actual Mount Olympus. Now, if I were a Greek person, I'd probably think there were gods up there too, right? So anyway, also warfare methods, very, very similar, right? Now, we talked about this in class today, how every Spartan is only as good as their shield. That's why every one of them were referred to as a hoplite, right? Well, the militaristic similarities between the two in style of fighting are actually very, very similar. Now, except for the fact that Athenians were the rulers of the water, whereas the Spartans were the ones on the ground. But when they both did fight on the ground, they used iron weapons, shields, and armor. Now, the weapons were particularly spears or short swords, and large, large iron shields, and then as well their armor had iron plating, but usually was hardened to leather, all right? So that is what your traditional Greek soldier is going to look like, right? This is actually an Athenian one. Now, they also both use this tactic called a phalanx, right? Now, the phalanx is more used by Alexander the Great and also the Spartans, but it's a massive tactical formation of heavily armored soldiers, right? The way it works is there's a row of guys up front, and they all have a spear and a shield, right? And then there's a row of guys behind them that has a spear and a shield. So each one, the further back you go, though, their spears get longer so they can also stay effective from the rear, right? Now, the interesting part about it is it creates a heavily moving force so they can push off, reach over the top and stab, and then if one of them goes down, the man behind them simply fills in that spot, right? So that right there is what a phalanx looked like. Now, the city-states are going to begin to grow rapidly, and they're also going to give way to the very first Western societies, right? So eventually, a lot of people, the reason why that they only think of Athens or Sparta whenever they think of ancient Greece is because they were the head honchos, if you will, of their groups of people, right? So Sparta, literally by looking at this map, you can tell that it was in purple, it's Sparta and its allies, and then in the orange, it's Athens and its allies, and then also the other ones are the neutral states, right? Ironically enough, This up here is where Alexander the Great's from. All of this is mostly rugged and uninhabited terrain. And then, of course, the Cretians are over there doing their thing. So, Athens and Sparta became the main dominant powers in the region at the time. Now, remember, when we're comparing them back and forth, Athens is democracy, excess, feasting, less rights for women, whereas Sparta is more rights for women, militaristic, oligarchy, rule by discipline, and aggressive military strategy, right? So, two very, very different personalities that are eventually going to collide when we talk about the Peloponnesian War, but we're not quite there yet, right? So, that is going to be all for tonight, and we're going to go ahead and pick up tomorrow about classical Greece, which is mainly defined by the culture that Athens generated, right? So, that's all for tonight, Camden Catholic, and I'll see y'all tomorrow, all right?